Beijing at night was a city of whispers. The old alleys, known as hutongs, were steeped in shadows, lit only by the occasional flicker of a dying street lamp. In the distance, the hum of traffic never truly ceased, but after 11 p.m., the city seemed to hold its breath.
It was November 14th, 1995. The air was bitterly cold, and the wind howled through the skeletal trees lining the road. A young man in his early 20s, dressed in a brown corduroy jacket and wool scarf, stood alone at the Yuanmingyuan bus stop, checking his watch with a sigh. 11:08 p.m. The final bus of the night. He had missed the earlier ones because of overtime at work. Exhausted and chilled to the bone, he prayed the last bus wouldn't be late. Then, headlights pierced through the mist. A creaking sound followed as bus 375 pulled into view. It was an old vehicle, faded white with a green stripe, its headlights yellowed with age. The engine wheezed like a dying breath. The bus came to a halt with a hiss of air brakes. The young man boarded, nodding politely to the driver, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a thick overcoat. The conductor, a woman in her 40s with a woolen cap, gave him a small, silent nod as he dropped coins into the fare box. There were only a few passengers inside, a couple dozing near the back, a woman in a business suit listening to her cassette player, and an old man quietly humming near the front. The young man took a seat in the middle, near the window. The city lights faded behind them as the bus rumbled forward, swallowing them into the silence of the outer roads. At first, everything felt normal, but then the temperature inside began to drop. The wind screamed outside as the bus crawled through the dim, empty streets of Haidian. The interior lights flickered once, then held steady. The road ahead was deserted. There were no cars, no people, just long stretches of asphalt and the occasional rustle of leaves. The young man leaned his head against the cold window, eyes heavy. That was when the bus came to a sudden stop. A small, unlit bus stop appeared on the roadside. No one was supposed to be there. The street was silent. And yet, 3 figures stood waiting. They boarded without a word. No exchange with the conductor, no payment. Just the sound of slow, deliberate steps climbing the metal stairs. The first was a tall man with a long, braided queue hanging from the back of his shaved head. His face was pale, expressionless, dressed in the faded blue robes of the Qing dynasty. The second, standing just behind him, looked nearly identical. Another Qing-style figure, just slightly older, with sunken eyes and a stiff gait. And the third was an elderly man, hunched, thin, and dressed in a tattered overcoat. His skin was nearly translucent under the fluorescent lights. But it wasn't their appearance that unsettled the young man. It was their stillness, the way they moved with no sound, and the way their eyes, blank and unblinking, seemed to search the bus not for a seat, but for something else. They sat near the rear. The bus felt colder. The conductor glanced at the driver. A silent exchange, the kind shared between 2 people who have seen something they wish they hadn't. The young man tried to shake the unease crawling over his skin. Maybe it was just the cold. Maybe they were actors, some sort of street performers. But then he looked again. The man in the Qing robe was sitting perfectly still, hands on his knees, spine rigid. His eyes did not blink. His chest did not rise or fall, and the fluorescent lights above them didn't cast shadows beneath their feet. None of them had shadows. The bus rattled forward, deeper into the outskirts of Beijing. Streetlights grew sparse. The fog thickened. Shadows outside the window seemed to move unnaturally. Inside, no one spoke. The conductor kept glancing into the rearview mirror, her lips trembling. The driver's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. The young man rubbed his hands together for warmth. He dared not look back. And then the silence shattered. The elderly man from the front suddenly stood up, pointing a bony finger toward the young man. "Thief!" he bellowed. "You stole my wallet!" Gasps broke from the other passengers. The conductor stood up abruptly, stepping forward. The young man froze. "What? No! I didn't." He looked around in disbelief. "I swear I didn't touch him." But the old man wouldn't stop shouting. "You think I didn't feel it? You slipped your hand into my coat pocket?" He marched down the aisle and grabbed the young man's sleeve. "Get off the bus with me, right now! We're going to the police!" The conductor looked unsure. The driver glanced back but said nothing. The other passengers avoided eye contact. It was chaos, sudden and confusing. But in the midst of it all, the three mysterious passengers at the back of the bus sat completely still, unmoving, unreacting, almost like they didn't hear anything or like they didn't belong. The old man tugged harder. "I won't repeat myself. We get off at the next stop, right now!" The bus groaned to a halt. The driver opened the door with a hiss. The young man looked to the conductor, desperate for help, but she just stared ahead, eyes wide and terrified. So he got off. The door closed behind them. The bus pulled away and vanished into the fog.
They stood in silence at a dimly lit stop, surrounded by trees. No cars, no people. The young man turned to the elderly man, still breathless. "What the hell was that? I didn't steal anything!" The old man exhaled, long and slow. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory, it was relief. "I know," he said quietly. "You didn't steal anything. I had to get you off that bus." The wind whispered between the trees, cold and sharp like glass. The bus had long disappeared into the dark, its taillights swallowed by fog. The young man stared at the old man in disbelief. "What do you mean, you know I didn't steal your wallet?" The elderly man lowered himself onto the edge of the sidewalk, sighing as he pulled his coat tighter, his breath clouded in the frigid air. He looked up, eyes tired, haunted, because there was no wallet. A pause. The young man blinked. Then why? Because they weren't alive. The ones who got on. You saw them too, didn't you? The way they dressed? Like they stepped out of a history book? The young man nodded slowly, his mouth suddenly dry. Qing Dynasty clothing. I thought it was just strange. Not just strange, the old man said grimly. Impossible. And their skin. It was too pale, like candle wax. Did you notice? The young man swallowed hard. He had. And something else, the old man whispered, voice cracking. They had no shadows. The words hung in the air like a curse. I was watching closely. When they stepped onto the bus, no shadows followed. Not from the ceiling light, not from the street lamp. Nothing. The young man looked down at his own shadow, flickering faintly beneath the glow of the streetlight. The old man shook his head slowly. That's not all. They didn't breathe. Their clothes didn't move. Their eyes stayed open the whole time. You think they were ghosts? Spirits? Possessed corpses? The The old man laughed bitterly. "Call them whatever you want, but I wasn't about to wait and find out what they wanted. I had to get you off that bus." The young man's heart pounded in his chest. The memory of their still faces, their empty eyes replayed in his mind. The old man stood slowly. "You'd have died if you stayed. Not just died, disappeared, like the others." "What others?" The old man didn't answer at first. He turned toward the dark road. "You'll hear it tomorrow, on the news. Just wait." The wind shifted again, and for a brief moment, the young man could swear he saw something moving deep in the fog. A flicker of headlights, then nothing.
The sun rose over Beijing like it always did, soft light spilling over rooftops, the haze of dawn clinging to the skyline. The city returned to its rhythm. Shops opened, traffic resumed, life moved forward, but not for everyone. At 6:45 a.m., a sanitation worker near the edge of a dried-out reservoir in the Western District made a report. A city bus was parked near the far embankment, abandoned. No driver, no passengers, just sitting in the mud like a relic. It was bus 375. By 7:30 a.m., police surrounded the area. The vehicle was cordoned off. Reporters arrived. The story broke on the morning news. Mysterious bus discovered after vanishing overnight, last seen departing Yunminyuan Terminal. Inside the bus were two bodies. The driver and the conductor were slumped in their seats, their faces pale, lips blue, bodies stiff and bloated, as if they'd been dead for days. Yet the bus had only gone missing for one night. There was no blood, no visible injuries, no signs of struggle, just death and something worse. The forensic team opened the fuel tank. Inside, they found no diesel, only a thick, dark red substance. Blood. Gallons of it. The investigation stalled. CCTV footage mysteriously failed to capture anything past 11:30 p.m. The tracking system stopped functioning right after the bus departed the third stop. None of the registered passengers were found. No trace, as if they had vanished into thin air. No ID, no reports of missing persons matching their description. No one knew where the bus had been during those missing hours. No one ever found out. The authorities issued a vague statement. Technical malfunction and exposure may have caused a tragic incident. Investigation remains ongoing. But people knew better. They always did. The young man who got off the bus sat in front of the television that morning, frozen. The same conductor, the same driver, the same bus. His hands trembled as he turned the volume down. Outside, the day was bright. Birds chirped. But he knew that death had been sitting behind him, just a row away, breathing down his neck, or not breathing at all. Years passed. Beijing changed. The roads widened. Buses were replaced with newer models. Old routes were retired. The city grew louder, faster, brighter. But even as the skyline rose higher and higher, some things stayed in the shadows. The young man, no longer so young, lived quietly now. He avoided late shifts, he avoided quiet roads, and above all, he never took public buses after dark. He never told his family what happened that night. Only the old man knew, and the old man had passed away a year later. Some nights, the man would find himself walking past Yunminyuan Terminal, even if just by accident. And every time he did, he'd glance at the old stop where he had once boarded bus 375. It was no longer in use, but the signpost still stood, faded, rusted, and crooked, as if time itself couldn't erase what happened there. It was late one night in November, almost exactly 10 years later, when he passed by again. Cold wind brushed his coat, leaves skittered across the ground. And then he stopped. Under the dim orange glow of a failing street lamp, he saw something at the stop. 3 figures, standing perfectly still. 2 men, tall, draped in flowing robes of another time, and one elderly man hunched over, unmoving. They didn't speak. They didn't move, and worst of all, they had no shadows.
His breath caught in his throat. He turned away, refused to look back, and walked home faster than he had in years.